Hi there, I'm Timothy Linsdale, video producer and Christian. Today I'm putting on my memorial cap and tipping my cap to the end of an era. The Pearl Harbor survivors closed their chapter in San Diego. It was down to 7 members, veterans of the 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor, and time has caught up to them in the way the war couldn't. Before we start, like and comment on my video and subscribe to support my channel if you would, that'd be great. Yes, there was some history behind this group of people that survived the attack on Pearl Harbor. The San Diego chapter of Pearl Harbor Survivors Association may be the last one still operating in the United States. And that would make some sense because of the very close contact this community has with the Navy. Bases, air bases, naval bases, a lot of Navy here. But as the article says, the relentless march of time has caught up to them, where the war could not. Stuart Headley, who's the last president of this chapter, is a fixture at veterans events for decades, and he continues speaking at schools, attending parades, memorial gatherings. But their official business ended this last Saturday on September 21st. He said, it's definitely an end of an era, as he turns 98 next month. And many of the survivors that are left are in their 90s or even over 100. Some have lived to 106. It's pretty amazing. They were believed to be the largest chapter in the nation, an original organization that included about 30,000 members across the country and dozens of chapters. After the San Diego chapter, Jack Evans, their vice president, passed in '96. No one else was ambulatory enough to keep the club going, so they had to shut it down, and down to 7 members. Now, you may recall Pearl Harbor is well known to most. On December 7th, 1941, Japanese attacked the naval base at Pearl Harbor. There were about 50,000 American service members in Oahu on that morning. So there were a lot of people that experienced this, besides, of course, the civilians. That particular attack, of course, shoved America into the war, into World War II. And about 2,400 Americans died, and another 1,200 were injured. And that's the basic history of that experience, and destroyed or damaged many warships, up to 30, and hundreds of airplanes that were destroyed and damaged. But those who survived, no one knows how many there are at this time, picked themselves up, helped win the war, got about their business, and became known as the greatest generation. They're all pushing the century mark now, and time is catching up to them. The President Headley were among about 100 people who gathered in an auditorium in a Mormon church for this last meeting. So there was a lot of memorabilia, I'm sure some tears, as the end came for their final meeting. The founding of the chapter was 56 years ago, when a group of them got together to discuss that period in their lives and the usual stories that seamen would swap over such an event. And some say that this generation taught us about bravery and how to live a good life. They demonstrated courage in fulfilling their commitments. That's some good stuff. They were dressed in Hawaiian shirts, or dresses, of course, for the ladies, and donning Hawaiian leis. And also, the men wore white slacks. Now, there was a symbolism behind that, of course. The Hawaiian shirts represented the location of the battle, and the white slacks actually represented the innocence of the time for a war that had started they didn't even know about until that very moment. The board held their shortest and final meeting as the president said a prayer, did roll call, expressed regret that this had come to this time had come to them. Now, like many World War II veterans, the Pearl Harbor survivors didn't talk much about their experience until later in life. And when you watch World War II documentaries and interviews, you realize that those interviews didn't come until many years later, that they could talk about those experiences. But as the president of the club said, we are done. We move on to the next chapter in our lives. In 1954, 11 guys got together that started this chapter as a reunion, and it grew across the country from there until it had about 30,000 members. And they'd get together and do events and share memories, but they did a lot of speaking to school kids and Memorial Day parades and multiple things like that. In fact, they say it's quite probable that unless they had because the club members and our activity, that America would recognize Pearl Harbor for what it was and remember it. As many of them would say, remember Pearl Harbor, the same as they would say, remember the Alamo. It was a very important part, not only in their lives, but our lives as Americans. In San Diego, of course, there was a large pool of veterans to pull from because of the Navy, and that was an important part of it. The late Bob Rufato, excuse my pronunciation, Rufato once told the Union Tribune, unless you were there, it's hard to understand what it was like. I've spoken to a lot of veterans over the years, and they've tried to explain their experiences because it's so exceptional what happened at Pearl Harbor, but also the World War itself. It was the biggest war in human history, covered worldwide, and involved millions and millions of people, and millions of people died, let alone the injuries that were involved. Remembering Pearl Harbor was important to them, and they would continue this process, and they said those that survived will also continue to speak to school children about this event and attend the parades and the memorial services as long as they can. There's not much time left before all the veterans of World War II are gone. And lest we forget, we need to remember what happened there to avoid doing that again. In a 2016 book, Pearl Harbor, From Infamy to Greatness, the author Craig Nelson wrote, "It could easily be said that Pearl Harbor would not today hold the special place it does in America's hearts if not for the greatest generation's efforts and this particular group of people." So life goes on for what time these guys have left. But they've left quite a legacy for us in understanding and knowing them and what they survived and what it was like for them. They wore baseball caps as part of this other part of this uniform they had, and it had a phoenix rising symbol on it, of rising from the ashes of that battle to win that war. During the production of Pearl Harbor, a 2001 movie, they had an opportunity to contribute to what went in that film, even though it wasn't, of course, 100% historically accurate like most movies. But one of the things I thought was interesting is that they convinced the producers to tone down the profanities. And that is a modern example of our today's culture, is profanity. It's a more coarse speaking culture. Because he said, yes, we had 4-letter words, but he said we didn't have that many. He said we didn't use that many because a lot of them had come from the farm and small towns where they were all connected to churches. And it was a different time, and I thought that was really interesting. Maybe we should all give that some thought about our speech. The 70 years after the attack, the National Survivors Association called it quits because so many of its members had passed away and there were only 10% left. And every day there are less. So, down we go, the end of an era. This Headley, the president, quote, "Being a Christian, I recognize the fact there's going to come a day for all of us." Headley said, "The way I've overcome all this loss is when I lose one, I pour my life into the others." Just think of that. They were always giving back, recognizing the blessings of surviving that experience and the obligation of pressing forward and fulfilling their commitments in life, becoming the greatest generation. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this little article about this closing of an era, the end of an era, and it happens. It happens to all of us. And like and comment on my video, subscribe to support my channel, and we'll continue on with the many challenges of the day and maybe end of other eras. Thanks again. Get out there and make it a great day.